Pour écouter cette session en français, veuillez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur l'onglet Interprétation et sélectionner le drapeau français.
Hello, bonjour.
Barry Saleho.
On behalf of ICLE Africa,
the African Centre for Cities,
Our Future Cities,
Red Cross Crescent Climate Centre, and partners,
we're excited to welcome all of you
to the Rise Africa 2022 Action Festival.
Rise Africa has been growing since 2020
as a platform for thinkers,
doers,
and enablers,
committed to inspiring action for sustainable cities.
This year's theme is
creativity.
For me, this means blending skills to be able to communicate the climate change complexity in rapidly urbanizing cities.
We are walking dynamites of creative expression, whether it be in the arts, in the sciences, or in tech.
There are so many people in the African continent who have a huge skill base and are creative in the way they approach challenges.
Creativity in Africa is about embracing our own. It's about dynamism and it's about embracing our indigenous knowledge.
I think agency is finding ways of giving power back to people, to groups, to young people, especially on a continent where it's a very young population.
One should be taking ownership and the responsibility to create an Africa that they would like to live in, as well as leave behind for the future generations.
I think what agency means to me is change from the ground up.
The importance of urgency is the recognition of the past and the recognition that we've lost time.
Urgency is about acting now to build more inclusive, productive, and resilient cities.
There's this need to creatively redesign and unlearn and explore new ways of thinking.
The festival is hosting 33 sessions
with 135 provocateurs from across Africa and the world.
Every session aims to show new ideas,
showcase ongoing action,
and launch new initiatives, bringing participants together
to chart a new route forward.
We hope that the festival program will inspire you.
At the festival, we encourage you to showcase your business and projects,
build lasting partnerships,
unleash your creative potential,
commit to sustainable action.
Rise Africa is about translating ideas into action. What actions are you going to commit to this festival?
Before the session begins, it is important to note that you're being recorded.
And by participating, you are given the consent to be recorded.
All recordings will be available on the program page after the festival. Creative expression is vital for creating new futures for our cities.
And so we invite you to enter this session in the spirit of creativity and dreaming.
L'Afrique est fatiguée de se retrouver dans l'obscurité. Elle est fatiguée de naviguer contre les courants de l'industrialisation. L'Afrique me dit qu'elle est fatiguée de se reposer au feu du bois. Il est donc temps de faire sauter les compteurs. Éclairons l'Afrique, libérons son énergie pour libérer son potentiel. Accélérons le rythme cardiaque de son développement. Libérons son énergie pour libérer son potentiel. Transformons l'enveloppe énergétique de l'Afrique pour stimuler son développement. Car la nature nous a tellement gratifiés de ses richesses. Changeons l'histoire, éclairons l'Afrique, donnons un bout de lumière à chaque foyer en Afrique est une possibilité. Changeons l'histoire, éclairons l'Afrique. Libérons son énergie pour libérer son potentiel.
Bonjour à tous et merci à la session d'aujourd'hui.
More sustainable cities and towns. I'm Rashik Fatah. I'm the CEO of Our Future Cities. And I'll start today by introducing you a bit to what we do and get into our session in a few minutes. A bit about Our Future Cities. I'll take you through our manifesto. We aim to shape the cities of tomorrow by cultivating opportunities to address our urban challenges. We create cities that work for everyone. We incorporate foresight in everything we do, even if we are ahead of our time, and get pushback for that. We're led by research, experimentation, and diverse perspectives. And over most of Rise Africa Action Festival this year, we've had quite a few different perspectives on cities. We work with governments, businesses, communities, and individuals, so not with one particular sector. We also work for different sectors. We understand that solutions require working across disciplines, dimensions, and scales, so we'll be involved in anything from social media projects to housing projects to policies to ideas, working with everyone from anthropologists to economists to engineers to property developers. Our work isn't just about the latest trend or buzzword. It's about how we commit to our just transition incrementally through big leaps, but also tactical small steps. We will focus on transforming places, shifting mindsets, redesigning systems, changing rules, and developing platforms, because we know that our future on this planet is tied to the future of our cities and towns. And so we're co-creating future cities that are sustainable and equitable, but also importantly, exciting, vibrant, and loved. As you can see, some of our projects range from public realm or public space related projects to planning, to discussions like Rise Africa and the Urban Festival, installations, policy projects, experimental projects. So quite a big diversity in the kinds of work we do to have impact in traditionally urban contexts. Our discussion today really stems from our interest in investment in urban areas and this need to create more sustainable and equitable cities. While there is urgency, not just in housing, but in various areas for more sustainable development in the, I suppose, African context and in urban African contexts, there is possibly a mismatch or missing links or missing dots between the urgency, which is grounded in evidence, I suppose, statistics and facts, which tell us what the backlogs are in people's quality of living, access to housing, access to mobility and transport and health, what financial institutions or financiers actually fund. So if we move around different cities and areas, we think we should see certain, I suppose, forms of infrastructure or certain kinds of developments. But what we do see is sometimes a lot of investment going into gigantic shopping malls or other particular types of investments. So there's this great urgency to invest more sustainably, but in our daily reality, we're not seeing that happen, or perhaps not fast enough. And there needs to be a massive acceleration in this. We do know, and as many speakers and sessions have mentioned throughout Rise Africa, that Africa will undergo unprecedented levels of urbanization over the next 30 years with various projections, and some of them saying that the population in urban areas will double by 2050. So this brings, of course, growing challenges and huge opportunities, but it's important to have a realistic conversation about the urgent needs and the emphasis for more impactful investment strategies. This doesn't mean that at our Future Cities, we don't like talking about good urban design, beautiful architecture, social housing, which is incorporated into open market housing and the design of that. It just means that you need to have discussions on both sides of the coin, or perhaps various sides of the triangle, the economics, the planning, the policies, and the financing. And that perhaps, hopefully we'll find out today, that where finance or money is moving is not always in the direction we want it to go. That's not to say that other sectors or classes are not important, but if we need sustainable investments in sustainable infrastructure, whether that's renewables or mobility, we need to start seeing what the mandates and criteria of various agencies are. And these financiers are not necessarily just your big banks, but various forms of multinational banks, governments themselves, government agencies, and how do we ensure that the funds and investment is mobilized to move into the right direction, to have, I suppose, the maximum benefit. Before we begin the presentations and discussions, just a reminder to please mute at all times, as I believe this is a meeting, not a webinar. You're welcome to ask questions throughout the session, so please use the raise hand function or type your question into the chat. Towards the end of the session, we'll have lots of time for questions, and ideally some people will be asking questions using the audio and video. The sessions will are being recorded, so please note that, and Zoom might have alerted you to that already. All the recordings will be available on the Rise Africa website in a week or two, as well as summaries of these sessions. For those who are on social media, please feel free to use #RiseAfrica2022 or the hashtag for our theme this year, which is creativity, agency, and urgency. And then I'm sure the team will post a link to the session survey in the chat. So please spend, I believe it's 120 seconds to complete the survey to give us your thoughts on this particular session. So just to kick off our session, we have a message from Salim Fakir, who's the Executive Director of the African Climate Foundation.
Good afternoon, morning, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. It's my real pleasure to be here, although I cannot make it physically. I'm really pleased to be able to do this via video or recording. Just to say that I really appreciate the invitation and the importance of the work being done under the umbrella of Rise Africa. As the African Climate Foundation, we are a new institution that is effectively very involved in 3 areas: energy transitions, agriculture, and urban transitions. And so we do welcome opportunities to engage, particularly on urban transitions. It's an area that is slowly developing within the ACF. We are very keen to understand the trends that are happening around urbanization. Africa's population is growing very rapidly. By 2050, we are looking at doubling the population. The rates of urbanization are going to be one of the fastest in the world. And thirdly, the demographics of the population will be very much young people that would have huge expectations and aspirations, and we have to meet that. In order to be able to support the growth and the managed development of urban transitions, we have to put basic things in the ground. These are ensuring that there are investments in key infrastructure, water, sanitation, electrification. And I would say that these days we have to also consider things like 5G and digital technologies, particularly broadband. This allows young Africans with huge talent and entrepreneurial capability to find ways to integrate within the global economy. Electrification is fundamental to the transformation of African cities. It unlocks so many things, and it is one of the challenges we have, given that particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, close to 600 to 700 million people don't have access to reliable and affordable energy. Also for not the basic things such as electrification at a household level, but also the potential to integrate e-mobility, which is electrified, and many other things that would not ordinarily happen if you did not have electrification. So we see this as one of the fundamental areas for the work of the ACF to unlock. The excellent convening that Rise Africa is undertaking is one of the ways in which to visualize and make visible the importance of urbanization on the continent. As ACF, we're not only working in South Africa, we are expanding our footprint in places like Senegal, Kenya, Rwanda, Ethiopia. We're also looking at Nigeria, Ghana, and Morocco. These are really exciting places. I, as a director of ACF, and my colleagues on the council and in the team within ACF, we are very excited about the huge opportunities to not only look at urban transitions as a positive development, but also an opportunity to leapfrog decarbonization and to find, well, in my view, this will be one of the most innovative places in the world for both financing, integration of new kinds of technologies and promotion of different models of urban development. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everybody and for giving me the opportunity just to share some thoughts and hopefully inspire you to work towards a very creative future and to use Rise Africa as a way to really promote the best ideas and the best solutions for the continent. Thank you very much.
Before I introduce our second speaker today, I just want to remind everyone that you are more than welcome to share your details, your information about yourself, your organization in the chat. I think Rise Africa is important because, as we've seen in some of our sessions yesterday and the day before, within a 2-hour span, we're able to connect Freetown, Kampala, Nairobi, Lagos, South Africa, Cape Town, Johannesburg. So please do share who you are in the chat, your websites, and if you wish, your emails, so that those connections can be formed for your business, for your institution, and for your organization. We're very privileged to have Kezia Rust, who's the Executive Director and the founder of the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa. We all know of the center and have used various reports and research over a number of years. And Kezia has also always replied to our emails asking for information, in particular about the South African housing market. The CAHF promote access to affordable housing and housing finance in Africa, and that's been for the last 20 years. Kezia is a housing policy specialist working both in the public and private sector, and with practitioners in promoting access to affordable housing as well as housing finance in Africa. She was also the housing finance coordinator at the Finmark Trust from 2003 to 2014, from where CAHF was established. And over the span of her career, Kezia has consulted and undertaken research in affordable housing finance, residential property assets and property markets, rental and social housing, and the creation of sustainable human settlements, among other issues. Kezia, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to hearing your views on that very simplified diagram I shared earlier. And great to have your experience and your thoughts on this particular topic.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Rashik. It's great to be here and so nice to be part of Rise Africa, and such a nice set of topics and issues to consider actually all together. I'm going to share my screen and then put it onto there. Is it as you expected?
That's perfect. Thanks.
Excellent. Good. Yeah, so very, very happy to be here, and really interested in the topic. We, of course, focus on affordable housing as the critical investment in cities. I am looking forward to the broader discussion as well, though, because, of course, houses themselves rely on cities functioning sustainably in other ways as well. And so there's such an important interconnection of them. I want to focus a little bit, just to take an angle to this and to really look at how do we recognize both the challenge and the opportunity for sustainability through data collection. And really that sense of, the guy that drops his keys and he's looking under a lamppost, and someone says, well, why are you looking under the lamppost? And he says, well, that's where the light is. And that really is what data is. And we have to be careful and ambitious to collect the data we need to answer questions that we haven't even started to ask ourselves yet. So that's what CAF tries to do. And every year we publish the yearbook, the Affordable Housing Yearbook, We've now done it, I think, 11 times. And last year's edition really summarized, I think, the thing that we've all been grappling with quite considerably is that given the urbanization pressures, the low growth that we've been experiencing, very low GDP per capita, the percentage of population living in slums, and then, of course, this new added pressure, immediate pressure and experience of the COVID pandemic. What's come into such clear focus is that we have to do much, much more in addressing the affordable housing challenge with far fewer resources. And what that means is that we need to actually become much more efficient in what we do. And that then leads to an interesting question when we're talking about sustainability and how that fits within the cities. So is the sustainability imperative a challenge or an opportunity? And what's so interesting is that oftentimes in the affordable housing space, people think, well, sustainable or green housing is more expensive. So it's actually not meant for low-income earners because the capital costs involved in constructing a house that is a so-called greenhouse is higher. And that's, of course, why finance comes in. Green finance is supposed to lower the cost of finance when a building is green. Thinking then about, well, what does that mean in the long term? And what does it mean for the implication of the household, not just on the ticket price, the price tag of the house, but over the long-term space? I'm also very, very happy that on this panel, Kyoe Wambach from International Housing Solutions in Kenya, because we're working with them on this question as well, about how do you start to quantify that? So what we look at when we think about affordable housing and the challenge, and a little bit this gets to your shopping mall question, is we ask every year people across the continent, what is the price of the cheapest newly built house built by a private sector developer in your country? And the map on the left shows that together with published, what we are calculating is the percentage of urban households who, with a potentially available mortgage, and that's a big if, but in every country it's published what the mortgage rate is and terms and so on. It's not always available like that, but presuming it was available and presuming it could be accessed by households living in urban areas, what percentage of those households could actually afford to buy that cheapest newly built house? And red means not so many, and green means a whole lot more. And that range, you can see that the map on the left-hand side is almost all red. So then what we did is we said, well, the cheapest house last year was in Abuja, in Nigeria. It was about $8,000 or just a bit more than that. So we said, what if we could build that house all over the continent? And then we would get more people into affordable housing. Surely we would. And the picture does improve on the right, but not entirely. There still are countries where there are real finance constraints and income constraints, where it's not just the price of the house that's going to solve the problem. It's a whole lot of other things as well. Then the next question is, well, the next observation is, okay, if that's the case, then clearly people are not buying their houses from the private sector. And in fact, they're building them themselves. And when they're doing that, they're doing it one by one by one by one by one. And what are the sustainability costs of that process? And opportunities in some cases, right? Because people are managing their resources independently and carefully, and they don't have money for wasting services, for example. So they might have a better conservation approach than a higher income household. But building houses one by one, are there efficiency challenges that we need to address in that space? So thinking again about the lamppost and the light and where it shines, together with Rial and 71.4, we've embarked on something we've called the Data Agenda for Africa, and we've identified a series of 115 indicators that we think give you a pretty good picture of what a housing sector looks like, so that you can begin to say, all right, I understand Kenya, or I understand Tanzania. And we've published those reports, and they're available on our website, and we're now embarking in the second year of data collection in those particular countries. what we know, of course, is always going to be limited by what we collect. So this is what we collect. And of course, you can't read this slide at all. But what we've done is the indicators are structured into 7 categories, 4 of which relate to the value chain. So land and infrastructure, construction and investment, sales and rental, management and maintenance. And then 3 relate to the context. And we're collecting data that is freely available already, or it's newly collected, and we put it together in one place for each country. And that's great and interesting. And we've never managed to collect all 115 indicators that we imagined would be useful in any country. And that's something that we then use to advocate with the national statistical bureaus or the central banks or the departments of human settlements or housing or land affairs about what's interesting is when government, especially whether at national or provincial or local level, just by virtue of their regulation, they create data all the time, right? So they know when they receive building plans, they know how many people want to build something because there it is. And if that were taken, the exhaust from that regulatory exercise was taken and collected, then we might have an insight into what kind of development activity is underway. So we've been working quite hard to really promote the opportunity of regulatory data, as well as national survey data from the statistical services and so on, as being valuable for housing investment purposes. Fascinating. None of it addresses issues around green or climate. The other gap that was identified was around gender and the impact on gender. And really the question there was, well, why? And of course, any list of indicators is a subjective exercise based on what you think you can collect. And what we found is that specifically looking at the question of affordable housing, and I'm getting to your question again on shopping malls, there is very little data that's been disaggregated to the point of affordable housing. Very hard even within the question of real estate to find housing. And then within the question of housing or residential to then find affordable is particularly difficult, which means, well, we're working where the light is shining, but that's not actually where we need to be. We need to broaden the light and broaden our data collection. So thinking a little bit about, well, what does that mean from a sustainability perspective? And this is something we're working on right now, is to say, how do we even begin to question and understand the issue of green and sustainability in relation to affordable housing, given the anxiety that some practitioners in this sector have that it's just going to make housing more expensive. And what we did is we built a bit of a matrix here, and we thought, okay, we want to understand the impact of housing on the environment. We also want to understand the impact of the environment on housing or households. And then we do that in terms of the housing construction process itself, then the housing management and maintenance, so the life of the house once it's been built. And then I think it's really worth starting to think about, well, what mechanisms or interventions might affect a shift to sustainability if we collect the data to show where the gaps are. So we're interested in things like the carbon footprint, both of the house itself as well as its life cycle over time. So in the construction of the unit and the materials you use and all of that, as well as the use of the services over time. But something for instance, the EDGE certification standards, which have been developed by IFC, their emphasis is on the carbon footprint relating to the construction of the house, but not so much the long-term usage of the house. And of course, long-term usage is often mediated by a household that's trying to manage their resources. And what's fascinating in this conversation as well is that when we want to design green financing instruments and EDGE becomes the certification standard, if we're not measuring the long-term usage process as well, it could be that we're actually undermining access to that green finance by lower income households. The other area that I think is really interesting is about embedded carbon within conversions and retrofits. So the whole of like inner city Johannesburg, it's there already. We don't have to build it again. So what kind of points, what does one get around that? Then thinking about on impact of the environment on housing and households, weather events, of course, and we need to look at those in the relation to where people live and what are they at risk of. and then the extent to which cities or other structures have mechanisms in place to respond to those. And how are those addressed? But looking at the last row, mechanisms and interventions to effect a shift, thinking about, well, what kinds of policies are there, and just compile those that particularly relate to affordable housing. The degree of local capacity to support the value chain is a critical issue because, of course, the importing of building materials is a high cost factor. But from a green perspective, using local materials that didn't have to travel so far also becomes an important thing to be able to measure. And as a way to then stimulate conversation in terms of the structure and the focus of the manufacturing sector in a country. We will look at things like the reach of EDGE certification in a country and in a city and in a market segment specifically. How does it relate to low income housing? The availability, target, and scale of green finance, but then the one I'm really interested in, and Kyoy, I hope that you comment on this in terms of some of the work that you guys are doing, is, well, what is the monthly contribution of a sustainable approach to household affordability? And I know that IHS had a case study in South Africa where they were able to make that comparison between what does it cost to live in a greenhouse and what is how cost to live at a house that's pre-green, and is there a difference, and can we start to communicate that? So in order to overcome this argument against green, which is subtle but it does persist in the affordable housing sector, we really need to demonstrate that green increases affordability, doesn't challenge affordability, and in order to do that we need to collect the right data to be able to do that. I'm almost finished here. I see I'm getting close to time. So we've looked at our data agenda looks at the regulatory data that exists. And that, if you look at this diagram here, the focus of that data agenda is on the navy and the white circles, macro level data that exists that we've gathered from lots of different sources that give you a picture of a country. It doesn't tell you what happens in Belleville, or what happens in Machakos or wherever, right? And that level of data becomes really important because that's in fact where sustainability is expressed. So we've developed this initiative, which we're calling the Open Access Initiative, to encourage the implementers of housing, whether it's developers or financiers or investors, to share the data of their development experience as it happens. So that we can start to track key metrics. And those would relate to 4 broad categories: product specs and costs. So, and that would include definitely a green component, you know, whether an electric geyser versus a solar geyser or whatever, right? Then process, the steps, time, and cost in the delivery of housing, then people, the impact on particular target markets, and then performance, which is where the ESG indicators come in, and specifically around sustainability. And again, Kyoy, you can see your logo is here because we're doing this also with International Housing Solutions in Kenya. And so that's very exciting that we're starting to build this. And what we hope is that more housing implementers, either the developers or the financiers or what, start to participate and work with the same framework so that we get comparable data. Just to conclude, to think about, well, what can cities do to support sustainable housing delivery? And this is a generic list. I can apply it in every country across the continent. It's relevant in South Africa. It's relevant in other countries. I think there's a really important role for cities to play in data collection itself. And that should not be so hard because the data is actually exhaust of their own regulatory processes. And so, for example, when they receive a building plan application, it's full of all that information. Could that not be, I don't know, scanned or, you know, somehow put into a way in which we can actually access it at source? Then, as I've said, then in addition to that, the product, the process, the performance. In terms of key metrics at city level, all that exhaust data that comes, the building plans, the housing starts and completions, municipal service delivery, payment for services, and so on. So to collect that and to share that. And then thirdly, to structure incentives, of course, to enable sustainability and measuring those, relating perhaps to density bonuses, the opportunity for retrofitting and conversions, and really recognizing that. And then that great linkage between smart billing, which also improves smart usage of services. Improving efficiencies at the local level, of course, relating to the speed of municipal approvals and the delivery of bulk infrastructure. And then, of course, governance and land use management. And then ways in which to leverage non-state capacity, because you did ask right at the beginning about the role of the state in all of this. And South Africa's state is relatively wealthy in relation to other governments across the continent, and we can't afford it as a government. So we really do need to leverage non-state capacity and make it easy for the private sector to invest. And while the government, cities, as well as provincial, national governments are leading in this way and really sharing information and making the sector much more transparent, broadening that light that spreads, private sector can also start to participate and engage in this open access platform. And just to conclude, for me, this is really the bottom line, is that when we compete on how we access our data, rather than how we're using it, we're also wasting resources. And if we have to pay attention to, we have to accept that we're living in a world right now and will continue forever. It's not going to change, that we have to do way more with increasingly less and less and less. We improve our efficiencies, well, then we should be sharing much more. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Casey. I already have a few questions myself, but I'll save some of those towards the end. I saw some parts of your graphic which I have some questions about. Before we continue to our next presenter, I just wanted to acknowledge some of the participants who've shared their details. Tanya, Ashish, Lorenzo, Ruth, Elena, who else has joined? So please just continue to share who you are and a bit more about your work, organization, even if it's not, even if you're just listening in to learn more about the particular topic. Moving from an African-wide discussion back to South Africa, we have Samantha Naidu from the City Support Program, who will speak to the Neighborhood Development Partnership Program and other initiatives in the National Treasury. For those who are not aware, the National Treasury is South Africa's government's bank, for lack of a better description, or how funding is being funding moves towards other spheres of government, other departments. So this particular program, Samantha, if I understand correctly, is to assist and support cities and towns to make better investment decisions, not just in housing, but in various areas at a spatial level, how they fund infrastructure, both the CapEx and the operational funding, preparing projects and catalytic projects, although I'm not a fan of the word catalytic, and the management of precincts where investment happened. So Samantha, give us the South African and National Treasury perspective on how you translate urgency into real projects which improve the quality of life and help cities make more sustainable and better investment decisions. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, thanks, Rashik. And also apologies from Colin Sekele, who is the Chief Director for the Neighborhood Development Partnership Program. And yeah, I'm with the sister program at National Treasury, which is the City Support Program, but we work very much hand in hand in relation to supporting the cities. As you'd indicated, the key focus of the work that both the Neighborhood Development Program and CSP have been doing is about getting cities and supporting them to make some investment decisions, and investment decisions that largely influenced by the location of it, how funding and financing influences it, etc., and how municipalities need to, over the long term, look at the sustainability in relation to these investment decisions and where they put their infrastructure investment. I mean, it was interesting listening to Keisha's presentation, and, you know, for us, data is critical as well in terms of the support that we're providing to cities. You know, CAF has been a partner with us in supporting the kind of work that we're doing with the municipalities, especially in the metropolitan spaces. And as well as we've gone a lot to focus on looking at what city data is there. And as Keisha had indicated, you know, how cities can use the regulatory data that they have at their disposal. You know, a lot of cities don't understand what one department collects and are not able to utilize that in better planning and decision making, etc. And then also we've been focusing a lot on economic data and how do we get even, you know, where private sector invests and how cities can utilize that data as well in terms of making decisions. So let me go forward. In relation to, you know, National Treasury's approach and especially the Neighborhood Development Program and the support that they're providing to, you know, cities and towns, you know, we're needing to grapple with a whole range of challenges that are sometimes at the national level, but as you were saying correctly, kind of impacts at very much at the city or town level, basically. And, you know, notwithstanding there's, you know, at a national level, we talk about inequality, unemployment, poverty, and declining growth. All these things are very much relevant in the municipal space as well. And it's about how cities can grapple with this, engage with this, and respond to their service delivery mandates and you know, providing services to their kind of communities and constituents. And over the last couple of years, you know, these economic challenges that are there have been further compounded by credit ratings that municipalities have. You know, the COVID-19 pandemic has been critical in terms of impacting service delivery, financing, and sustainability of municipalities as well. And then I think what Keisha touched on as well, that these challenges have been compounded by climate change, you know, weather-related and other disasters. You know, in City of Cape Town a couple of years ago, it was the crisis around water that they've had to grapple with. In eThekwini more recently, the issues of flooding, etc., have had some major impact in terms, you know, and influence now going forward how cities are making their investment decisions and investing in infrastructure. Just on this graphic, you'd see that by 2030, weather-related and other disasters will cost cities around $314 billion, basically. And, you know, as that says there, it's more than the GDP of South Africa. And what we're finding is that it is the urban poor that are most vulnerable and exposed to these risks. So municipalities now are not, you know, have got a number of challenges around climate issues. You know, they're having to deal with the financial implications. They're having to deal with the failure in infrastructure and lack of services now to communities and things like that, but also the recognition that the poor and vulnerable in their communities are getting more poorer and are much more impacted by the climate and climate challenges that we're facing. these are just pictures of over the past couple of weeks, what is happening in KZN. And further, I think, relates to your issue of urgency and how we're bringing, climate responsive and sustainable investment, and, how quickly we can deal with that. And what we have basically been looking at over the last couple of years in trying to address and support municipalities has been trying to see, well, how in some of these large centers, there is declining growth, and that declining growth has been exacerbated by our unequal kind of urban spatial form. And I mean, we've been talking to this for years, I think, and there may be small changes happening, but the scale of change is not adequate. And so 25 years since kind of the new kind of democracy that we have, we're still seeing very much fragmented and inequitable kind of urban spatial forms in our cities. And that has a direct link as well to issues of affordability and sustainability that we're seeing. There's, a number of our programs that government has put in place have kind of deepened some of these issues and have not resulted in addressing the causes of the spatial fragmentation in our cities. We also, I mean, we were exposed to elections last year, local government elections, etc. But pre those elections and post those elections, there's big city challenges around city governance. We get coalition governments, etc. But a lot of that has not resulted in service delivery improvements and efficiency and effectiveness, etc. And as I mentioned earlier on, the climate change aspect is again creating further unsustainable patterns of development in our cities. So what do we, as government, have we, especially at the national level and in collaboration with municipalities, especially the biggest cities in the country, as well as provinces, been trying to do, has been focusing on the spatial transformation and spatial integration agenda. And I mean, Keisha spoke earlier about the access to affordable housing and the lack of it, and some of the challenges that we're finding in the city space. And I think you also, Rashik, spoke about the issue around improved mobility, public transport, etc. And how do we get all these things to work together? Because it's not just about housing, it's not just about transport, but it is the integration of these kind of interventions that will create the impacts that we want. And for us, from a national perspective, how do cities try to do that is being critical, given that they are at the face and they are the ones that are dealing with this broader human settlements that needs to be much more efficient and effective. The issues also that we've been grappling with has been around looking at expanded investment in core infrastructure. We spoke about the issues around water, electricity. I'm sure everybody's looking at 5 o'clock, am I going to be load shedded or not, and things like that. And those are the things that are impacting service delivery, and we're seeing it, in terms of state-owned entities and their functioning, but also in the municipal space around those things. And the other issue is, and I mean, we've been saying that government can't do it on its own. There's the fiscus, but fiscus gets directed in particular ways and for particular kind of can I say, interventions that government is focusing on. So a lot of the questions is about how do we get in private financing to support a lot of the interventions and get municipalities to engage and work with the private sector as well in terms of expanding their resources. through National Treasury, I mean, it's been critical for us to look at how do we broaden participation of the financing institutions around this. And I've been looking at regulatory frameworks around that to do that. You know, how do development finance institutions and commercial financing institutions play in this role? And how does government enable and bring them into that, into the financing of especially infrastructure in local government? We've also been looking at innovations on financing instruments, and National Treasury, together with, I see colleagues from DAG in the session, etc., have been working together to look at instruments around land value capture, etc., and land-based financing. And then there's some other national interventions that have happened, like, you know, in the presidency having Infrastructure South Africa, the DBSA having an infrastructure fund that's coming through. And I think our role has been from National Treasury in supporting the municipalities is connecting the dots, getting municipalities to be able to access these kind of national interventions for that. I think the other aspect that I wanted to touch on is around the enabling policy and regulatory environment. And we've been looking at planning alignment, regulatory alignment, fiscal reforms, as well as the kind of monitoring and reporting to see, are we getting the impacts that we want around this? And I think some of these things relate to Keshia's presentation as well. So the focus for us and the priorities that we've been engaging municipalities on have been around the spatial integration, the investing in core infrastructure in especially targeted areas. So where there's inclusive, you know, where we want to get densification in cities, etc., and where there is more people that are located as well that we're needing to target. It's been around getting management and maintenance of infrastructure, which has been key, and I've spoken about that already, and also looking at small and local businesses and bringing them, especially in some of the township economic development areas that we've been looking at as the program. The neighborhood development program then has been, and you know, has 2 grants that they've been supporting cities on. However, as I said, you know, grants are not the only thing, and we're looking at how we bring in private sector investment, because we're working in the larger municipalities. The assumption is that they are able to get more revenue on their own. Therefore, you know, their share in terms of the fiscus is lower than elsewhere because they have the ability to get other financing. And you know, the issues there are some of the things that we're wanting to achieve with the program. The program currently is working in around 57 hubs. And there are 37 hubs in kind of 8 metros that we're working in, intermediate cities, as well as some of the rural municipalities. And we've got 20 new hubs. And hubs essentially are some of these precincts that we're working with in the municipalities. Our approach has been much more looking at urban and regional networks, so focusing on planning to see where targeting of investment needs to happen in the city spaces, then working a level lower in terms of the corridors of where investment needs to happen in the cities, and then at a precinct level and on catalytic projects within those precincts, basically. I'm wary of time, so I am trying to go a little bit quicker. But the kind of catalytic development work that we've been doing has been focusing on getting faster project preparation and better portfolio management by these municipalities. You know, we've seen in the past a lot of the investors are saying, you know, we want to invest in your cities, we want to invest in projects, but we're not seeing the the pipeline that is coming through from government, especially at the municipal level. And that's where now we're focusing to support the cities to develop that pipeline in well-located, areas, so that that can happen. And it is then again about getting deeper leveraging finances into those areas, and then looking at focused investment that are supporting spatial transformation, and especially now in our municipalities and in the country where there is low growth and declining growth, that and post-COVID, the whole sense of economic recovery that we have to have in our cities and in the country. And we've been working with some of the cities around revitalizing their industrial spaces, but also looking at how do we engage better and do better planning around township economic development, so that we are responding to what the needs are better in township areas as well in our municipalities. So yeah, these are just some of the key considerations, the pipeline, making sure that the projects that we're looking at are not white elephants, but are things that communities and public are engaging in and are utilizing. And it's about also, for municipalities, when they invest, a key aspect for them is how they're generating revenue from that investment as well. So, for helping them and supporting them in doing that. I mentioned the issue of packaging of projects, because that has been a big gap in our system when it comes to investment in our in infrastructure, especially in the country. The issues of climate resilient infrastructure has, I mentioned that, and the need for that. And currently we're working with the 8 metros, especially in packaging projects that deal with climate resilient infrastructure. And these are some of the projects across the 8 metros that we're working on, and bringing in climate issues in the very early stages of conceptualizing projects, not later down the line as an ad hoc intervention. I think just to kind of conclude, some of the kind of challenges and lessons that are coming through is that, governance is a critical thing, in our cities and stuff. And it impacts communities directly. And the lack of governance and no clear vision that's there by cities creates a whole lot of competing kind of priorities in city spaces, and that doesn't bode well when various different departments in the cities are competing with each other in terms of funding for investment. And so what we're saying is that clear vision and leadership at the city level is important, and that vision needs to then guide provincial, national and private sector investment in that city space. I think that would talk to your other issues that you mentioned earlier around agency, and we're saying that municipalities, and especially leadership in municipalities, have a lot of agency that they need to bring to the party. They, as change agents and making the cities that are sustainable in future going forward requires agency and governance in that. There are critical challenges at the city level, and I think those are the realities we're needing to confront when we talk about investment and stuff. There's lack of capacity in a number of cities across the country. Their inability to work across their departments horizontally, let alone vertically in the systems, are problematic. And we know there are procurement challenges in our cities, that we're needing to grapple with and address. And I think National Treasury is taking those things quite seriously. There's also the key aspect of, you're trying to do development, but your key stakeholders are sometimes missing from that. And how are we getting communities engaged in those processes? And there are interventions from Treasury that we supporting municipalities on in our economic development programs, as well as the support around housing and informal settlement upgrading, etc. I think the other thing that I want to reflect on there is the development of champions that we're needing to see, because in a lot of ways, things happen when there are people that can champion it. It's not sometimes something that can assist us when we want to go up to scale on issues. It is a problem, but what we're seeing is where there's relationships, where communities have relationships with municipal officials, etc., where municipal officials are engaging with private sector and things. It's about those relationships that are driving change and projects and programs at the city level. And then, what's required is some levels of creativity that we're needing to see. In terms of the planning, and I think there's been lots of discussion around that. There is also creativity required in terms of our financing mechanisms that we're needing to bring to infrastructure investment. And there is some creativity in terms of how we manage these investments as well. That's critical going forward. And I think, I think a lot of municipalities now are much more open to looking at partnerships and bringing in creativity from communities and the private sector. And these are just some of the examples of what neighborhood development has been working on around the country with some of the municipalities. Rushik, can I just leave it there? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samantha. I also have 4 or 5 questions, but I'll have to save them for the end, and hopefully we can touch based on some of the last images you showed. I think some of them were integration of parks and spaces into neighborhoods as well. Our next presenter is Kyoe Wamba, is the Managing Director of IHS Kenya, responsible for credit and portfolio management. IHS obviously is International Housing Solutions. Kyoe has a 2080s experience.
Hello?
Apologies, Sheik's internet cut out, but he'll be joining us again shortly.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Kyoe. Apologies for that. I just got kicked off the internet, but I'm back. Leading with experience in the Middle East, Europe, Asia, and Africa across different asset classes, working for sovereign-backed asset owners and blue chip development and construction companies. So Kyoe has lots of experience in understanding why we are not financing or creatively financing, as Samantha mentioned, urban developments which are sustainable and promotes more inclusive and integrated urban areas and cities. Thank you so much, Kyoe, for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I hope you can hear me.
Yes,
greetings to everybody. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. And as mentioned, I work with IHS Kenya. We started our operations in Southern Africa, but we'll go into the details of the company a bit later. Just focusing on the topic that is at hand, we have been working in the affordable housing space for a couple of decades, for about 1.5 decades. And a lot of our thinking, a lot of our strategy has actually been born a lot by the macroeconomic indicators around the continent. We are not fully Pan-African. We've done a lot of work in Southern Africa. We're now in East Africa and hoping to basically build up on our expertise here and then spread out to the rest of the continent but a lot of our work has actually been driven by what's happening at a macroeconomic level. So I thought that I would just go quickly through some of the key issues that have helped define our business. And they come a lot with the whole issues of cities, as we'll be discussing. I think the first thing is just the numbers. And I think the key takeaway here, as you can see, I'd done this before a while back, looking at some of the statistics in Africa, is I think the key takeaway here, and it was highlighted by the head of the Africa Climate Foundation, Chair and President, is that Africa is growing in every single way. We are growing. We are growing in terms of population. And unlike other areas like in Europe, our demographies basically show us that the young people are a very, very big component of our population. Number two, our economies are growing. And they're growing very fast. Some should be growing faster, but even in spite of that, many of them are growing very, very fast. Number three, our economies are growing. Household incomes are growing. Discretionary income is also growing. Number four, and I think I'll spend a bit of more time on this, is the whole issue about urbanization. Urbanization is growing significantly. And also just the whole issue about education. And all these things basically intertwine and are connected in some way or another. And by the time we finish, hopefully I'll try and connect the dots. Again, this is just a message about the cities that are growing. You know, the issue about the fact that in the next 40 years, some of the populations will have tripled, which is basically the same message. I think I'll just focus a bit on this, which is quite important. I think as mentioned, yeah, we are growing at 3.2%. The global average is basically 2%. By 2030, 50% of Africans shall be living in cities. Something that is very important, I think, for us all is the whole issue that the continent requires annually about 93 billion to fund infrastructure needs. What, though, I have found interesting is that if you look at Asia, as we were saying, is that the capital investment in Africa over the past 40 years has averaged about 20% of GDP. Whereas if you look at East Asia during this same period, it has averaged about 40%. And that number basically speaks a lot from what we see now and the effects that this has just basically on building up the cities in an urban way. I think some of the advantages we have seen and we could look is that when you look at urbanization, there's a direct correlation between urbanization and the increase in GDP. I think the studies from OECD suggest that 30% on our continent is primarily due to the whole issue regarding urbanization. Cities drive development. The more cities there are, the more the development comes up. The whole issue regarding the rural areas. And the more we urbanize the rural areas, the more we get out of them. And the whole issue regarding urbanization basically also improves access to finance, which also is a very big key thing. So for us in our business, this is very important, even as we look around in terms of where we want to begin spreading our business. All these factors basically come to play. And you will find that the more urban the cities are, the more likely it is that one is able to actually even do the business that they want to basically do. Governments, another key component. How can governments help? I think number one is the whole issue about anchoring development around specific cities. I think the whole issue regarding boosting local investment capacity. And I think the third one, and I think it's an interesting one, I think for us we've seen is the whole issue about decentralizing. I think the more the governments are able to decentralize a lot of the issues, the development issues to the local governments, the more development you see. And there are quite a few examples actually for this, and I think Kenya is one of the examples where the government basically decentralized administration to the counties. And in the past 10 years, there has been significant and visible developments that have been seen many of the small towns or the rural towns, many of towns have basically grown in leaps and bounds in terms of investment in their infrastructure, investment in their agriculture. And generally speaking, you find that the economic well-being of many of these small towns has basically grown. So, international housing solutions, in light of that, who are we? I said we deal in affordable housing. We primarily focus on the major cities. We are also very entrenched in energy efficient buildings, and all our units now are basically EDGE certified. We've raised about $600 million across individual investors. We've done nearly just under 30,000 units in a couple of countries. And we basically focus on the affordable, and we do some social housing. In Kenya, and I'll just put this up. In Kenya, you find that we have an annual demand of about 250,000 units, but there's much less that is taking place. If you look at the graph on your left, the orange long stack basically shows the annual demand for the affordable housing space, and the blue one is basically for the high-end housing. But when you look at the supply for the affordable housing is very low, and there has been a lot of demand in the market here for affordable housing. And as I said, a lot of what we are seeing is that a lot of the macroeconomic elements basically come into play. We basically have quite a varied strategy in terms of how to develop. We develop with local developers in turn, who we basically either partner with them or we do turnkey deals with them. We also help them find financing locally in terms of development. Other types of developers, we basically guarantee offtake, so they get their own financing, they develop. After 18 months, we basically write them a check and offtake all of their units, which have been pre-designed and pre-agreed on how they would be. And it has actually been a very interesting journey. And for us, I think some of the key issues that have really been top on our list in terms of our delivery and that anchor our strategy. Number one is the markets. It's basically getting a much better understanding of the market. And when I say market, it's from the cost side, the cost of materials, unfortunately, because of the COVID and much more so because of the issues in Ukraine, commodity costs have gone significantly high. So that has been a big issue for us in the past few months. But it is very important for us to understand from the cost side and also from the demand side, understanding, again, going back to what we're saying about the people who we are targeting, how much money are they earning, how much discretionary income do they have, the issues regarding urbanization. And I think Kesia mentioned a few issues there that we actually work jointly with them. I think in Kenya, unlike other places, land is a big issue. A lot of land here is privately owned. So issues regarding cost, issues regarding land tenure come into play. And then I think another big issue is just the whole issue about finance. And finance is basically the front end side. Finance for infrastructure. There are areas we go and we find that there's no infrastructure. And this infrastructure is primarily put by the government. If we finance that infrastructure, it'll basically wash away the affordability at the word go. And also at the back end of the financial spectrum, once the units are ready, how do you help people to buy units? Typically, unlike other places like in Southern Africa, the mortgages are not financial tools that are used to actually access affordable housing, because the mortgages in this country are not affordable. So there's been a lot of financial engineering that comes to play to try and figure out ways of how we can basically create ways for people to rent or people to own. Yeah, so I think that's just a quick snapshot about what we are doing and how all these issues regarding urbanizations and the cities come into play into our business. And it's just one thing that we cannot ignore and we have to put into place even as we develop our strategy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Koi, and thank you so much to Samantha, Kesia, Koi, and that earlier message from Salim. There are a number of questions that I have, but I think let's get cracking with a question from Karen Abrams. Karen, I'm not sure if you'd like to share your audio and ask this question, but I'm also happy to do it on your behalf.
Thank you so much, Rashik, and thank you, everyone. I'm Karen Abrams from the Wits School of Governance. So, Samantha, you can read my question there, but it's a kind of question about this this tendency for kind of extra state interventions in neighborhoods that are resident driven, and whether that's kind of because of it being anti kind of the processes of the state, or whether it's a deep lack of trust in state processes, whatever those are. But are there, is there ever a kind of scenario in which there's residential identification and investment into neighborhoods, and can those get traction with the city support programs outside a kind of more politicized ranking or priority identification system using municipalities? And I know, of course, it's a dangerous question, but there are these kinds of residential developments kind of peppered all over, and I bet would be increasing over time, particularly as people kind of offshore their own finances and want to create their own neighborhoods. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen.
Do you want me to take that now, Rashik? Or...
Yes, Samantha. I think let's tackle the dangerous questions while they're available.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, and I suppose it goes to the fundamental, what is the role of the state in relation to these things, and how do you give agency for communities to participate and in their own kind of development, etc. I think more and more government, and especially municipalities, are recognizing the need to work with their communities. I think, municipalities generally, in terms of their functions, would want to have a bigger sense of how planning is working in the city space and things. But I do think that there have been some successful but very few engagements where municipalities have allowed communities to kind of take ownership and leadership of events and have tried to support. But I think you're quite right, government doesn't generally work like that, and that is a challenge. We at one level we're saying we want participation, we want agency from communities and etc., but then on another level there's a pushback against that, and we definitely have not found what the right balance is in relation to that. I think, in our programs through City Support Program have been, engaging municipalities on community-based planning, implementation, etc., through the work that we're doing around our township economic development work, and have tried to come up, creatively in relation to that. But again, it is also, working with officials that are governed by other kind of processes within their institutions and are not able to necessarily, get that agency to work with communities. I know I'm not answering you directly, but I mean, I think, that's what we want to see, but we know the realities of that situation have prevented people at an individual level to do that, but also institutionally, there are these kind of things that we deal with as well. So yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to see how, if in other cities across Africa, how they get that kind of balance right to play the role of a municipality, but also allow for residents to invest and take ownership of their investment in their communities.
Samantha, while we're with you, I'm not. What sounds like possibly there's space for evolving relationships between different spheres of government that's not purely parent-child or instructive. But at the same time, while we're sticking to the dangerous questions, I do wonder around pragmatism and progress. Because you had this really good graphic, which really sums up a lot of the nature of some cities, not just in South Africa, but other places we've seen. One or two business centers or cores, business nodes where the majority of the jobs are large housing projects as showcases on the outside, not that they're not good projects. On the periphery, townships of various forms and sizes and, a wrapping of suburbs. And programs like the Neighborhood Development Partnership Program and others are trying to help cities make better investment decisions, but when one looks at a city, and whether it's Cape Town or another city, and you go that there are 3 clear job nodes, but you can't get to any of them by bus or train. You simply can't do that. You can't. We talk about large-scale housing projects, but has Durban or Cape Town unlocked a single affordable social housing project in or near any of their business nodes in 20 years? So how do you work in a constructive relationship where you can package and prepare, but I can send you 14 parking lots in Goodwood, Para, Bellville that are available for social affordable housing tomorrow. How do you build relations to still do the basics? And you talk about township economic development. I'm not trying to put you on the spot to represent all of government, but where is that single safe 24/7 route to the train station and taxi rank at any time of day to develop township economy? So we're always sort of, not just at our future cities, but in our work, stuck between, we love the big programs. It's all relationship based. It's all about working together. But at the end of the day, there's pragmatism and practicalities, and we're not seeing that. So is it holding back grants and revenues, or is it tying different performance agreements? Because ultimately, if you can't direct investment in small ways and encourage the projects which should be happening, how do we do the big catalytic things at the same time? And so I'm not sure if that's a question, but how can the relationship evolve to do the, can I hop on a bus from here to the next business node easily at all times of day? Can I walk 1 kilometer safely in township X to the major interchange at all times of day? So I often wonder the gaps between quality of life, what should be happening, and the same in Durban, in the inner city. We work with the city of Durban. There are 23 different sites probably ready to go for various forms of the kinds of city we need, but haven't. So what do you do? How do you unlock, but at the same time, keep your eyes on bigger picture?
Yeah, and I can't answer that. I haven't been able to do that, and I don't think, from Treasury side, that's what we want to see, you know, and we grapple with the range of things. We try to deal with the technical support to the cities. We try to tinker with the national policies of particular departments, and we look at the financing instruments. And we, you know, I think, you know, in a way, Treasury has been critical in trying to look at all these things to see, you know, is there a difference? Is there an impact? And, you know, I can say that colleagues, you know, question themselves all the time around why are we not getting the impacts, you know? And they, yeah, I mean, you know, we assume we're working together as well, and as government, you know, we try to rectify things by putting in a lot of different systems and processes, and getting, you know, the IGR system to work better, but it's there are problems around that, and you know. And we asking, I think, our municipalities and engaging them in terms of trying to say, how are you working, you know, vertically across spheres of government to get investment in your space? How are you bringing communities into it? How are you bringing other private sector and working with them? And, you know, in a lot of these instances, the cities themselves are not working across each other, and that's a big challenge as well. So yeah, there's assumptions around working together, Rashik, that I think, you know, we assume, but doesn't happen necessarily. And you know, having new systems and processes don't always work that way. I mean, I think, you know, Treasury does look at sometimes the kind of stick, you know, there's carrots, but there's sticks as well in relation to grants and whether municipalities are performing and how do you withhold and things. But yeah, I think it hasn't always had the desired effect, because by withholding from some municipalities who've got the greatest need, then there's a challenge there in terms of saying, you know, are we stopping funding from people that deserve it the most as well? And you know, so there's a lot of issues to grapple with there. And but yeah, I think it's some things that government more broadly at a city level, but also nationally, we grappling with. But a lot of the stuff, I think our focus has been on the planning and trying to sort that out, and we stuck around the implementation stuff. And don't necessarily have the right models and tools and instruments at the implementation level to do some of these things. Yeah.
Thanks, Samantha. I'll take you out of the hot seat. And I think we can only address so much in a short period of time. Kezia, there were some very interesting elements in the presentation. I think it was the one with the various circles. I think it was an organogram. And I just wanted to clarify, Kezia, there was a slide which said, what do funds and DFIs look at but keep internally? I was wondering if you could elaborate on that in terms of what you meant by the kinds of elements that they keep internal. And that, I suppose, links on to my second question, if I can sneak it in, is around the transparency of housing developments. I know that in parts of the UK, I'm not sure if it's 100% sure if it's London, but if a project does not meet the affordable housing percentage or requirements set out by the city authority, that they need to motivate through their model by making their numbers available as to why not and why they can't make a certain number of affordable housing units possible. So I suppose it's two questions. What does it mean? What the green element, what funds and DFIs look at? And then secondly, are we also talking about transparency in the model, the financial models for a particular project?
Yes. Hi. I thought I'd just put that image back up again to share it so you can take a look at it a little bit more clearly. But what I was trying to show, so the green blue, orange, and yellow circles are about the detail of the project itself. And when a project is underway, the experience of it and the data associated with that is usually kept within the developer. The developer keeps that data themselves and shares it with their investor. They don't really want to share. The reason they don't share it into the public domain so much is twofold. The one is they're busy. They're trying to build houses. And so they're not engaged in the process of sharing information. That's just not what they do. Similarly, so the funds, even development finance institutions that are supposed to be supporting a development argument and being developmental in the work that they do, they often don't share information about what they've invested in. And that's a lot because they're busy managing the investment. And fair enough, because we'd quite like them to do that and focus on making sure that it works. However, then the second reason is that some of that information is proprietary. It could be, for example, that the land price that was achieved in a development is because the developer had a particular negotiation with another piece of land or whatever. They did something and they were able to get a good land price, or their access to bricks gives them, there are a whole range of things where the developer, through the strength of their relationships and their experience and their role in the sector, is able to leverage opportunity. And in a competitive environment, they don't want to share that, and fair enough as well, right? So they want to be able to drive their housing and make it so that they can achieve the return that they desire and that they promise to their investors. And we want them to do that too, because if they don't, their investors will go away and then they won't have any money to build. So that said, sometimes the thing that's secret is like on page 23, and it's the third paragraph of whatever. And the rest of the information is really interesting. And my experience, whether at CAF and also as a consultant working in the field, is that developers often commission feasibility studies for their developments, one after the other, and the consultants are all doing the same basic feasibility study. This is what the Kenyan market looks like. This is the population. And we're wasting resources there because we are then all doing the same thing rather than have the general stuff out in the public domain, everyone can access for free. And then what we spend on what we keep secret is actually the innovation, and that we, if there has to be something that is the competitive edge, keep the competitive stuff that really puts the magic in the development. That can be where things aren't shared. So I accept completely that there are things that developers and investors will want to keep to themselves. Ultimately, I'd love to go further and say that actually the magic is in the implementation, not in the planning. And in that case, everything could be shared, because what you do with the information is what's really interesting. But we'll get there. In the immediate term, it's to say that there's a lot of stuff we're not sharing because it's inconvenient to do so, and we should find a way to be able to share it. When that happens, it also changes the parameters in which you operate, because then you have a better, if I know about 5 different developments, about the product costs, I can start to benchmark my project against those ones, and I can see, am I in the ballpark? If I understand the kinds of the target market that's being targeted and where they happen to be living and that kind of thing, I can better invest my project somewhere else or with in other places. And so more intelligence then might sharpen the offering. And that might also enable developers to improve their success rates, because they'll know what the market that they're operating in. So that's really what we're hoping for. Right now, though, all of that information is kept secret in the report the developer makes to the investor, the report that the investor makes to the investment fund. The third reason why people don't share stuff is that sometimes it's bad news, and they don't really want people to know that they didn't achieve the return that they were expecting. And fair enough, I guess. But when that bad news is because something in the system is broken, I really think that actually should be shared. Because if the reason that you don't achieve the return that you expect is because it took you 3 times as long to get a development approved, well, I'd like to take that information back to the city and say, do you realize the cost of the delay? And I think as cities, we should be held accountable for that. That's part of the development process. And oftentimes, cities can't act on information they don't have. And so if developers start to say, well, I'm not going to go and work in that city because they're so slow and it's going to cost me, if the city doesn't know that, they're not going to know how to improve it. So I really feel that that's why that information should be made public. In terms of your second question, and the inclusionary housing, again, I think that there's an issue there about market transparency and opportunities. And I think in part, if it's easier and cheaper to develop higher value housing, well, then of course the developer is going to do that. That's what they do. And that they don't develop affordable housing in some places may well be because it's harder. So the thing that the city can do in that context is to change some of those metrics. Transparency in that is really important, and to understand. And to the extent that if a developer themselves isn't going to share that, the city can certainly share it after the fact and start to build in a culture of that information, because once the building's there, there's information just by its existence that can be shared. So in my view, I think there's a whole lot of incentives, and certainly on the African continent, focusing on affordable housing, it boggles the mind why that isn't why we have to use that adjective. Of course it must be affordable because that's the population. It's that whole focus, and it's the market. The affordable housing is the dominant market that needs to be tackled. And if we don't know the struggles that developers are having to meet to make ends meet, then cities won't know how to fix those and how to address them. And if developers aren't engaging in a market just because they're somewhere else, well, the city itself has power to show that information into the market as a way to slowly shift the attention towards this market. A lot of things have to happen at the same time, I'd say.
Thanks, Kesia. Kyoe, I noted, of course, that International Housing Solutions raises funds from a number of investors for very particular funds and for very particular reasons. I'm not sure if you're at liberty to share, Kyoe, but what is that conversation like? If you are, let's say, focusing on affordable housing that is more sustainable in a particular regions or particular cities, and you're speaking to, I assume, multiple investors. I'm not sure if you pitch to them, present to them, if those investors are banks or private equity. What is that conversation like to motivate them to contribute to that fund? Is it all about numbers, or is there a different conversation to be had? And I noted in one of your funds you said there are 5 investors. Why not 25 investors? Or am I simplifying the management and the development of a fund?
Thanks for that. I think there are many answers to that. I think in principle, there's quite a lot of funding out there. And a lot of that funding is very segmented for different asset classes, for different reasons. For us, I think there are 2 things. Number one, there is the financial component that comes to play. And there's also the impact side of things. As I mentioned, we also are very strong on green, on energy, and that also has brought in specific people who only fund green initiatives. So if you're funding a green initiative and then it is within the affordable housing space in locations that are very needy, then that in a sense ticks many boxes. The fact that we have been very fortunate to actually have delivered units before also lays credence to the product that we basically have. And also what we do is that the whole issue about affordability is something we sit down with many of the funders and try and put a number and a face and a look at it. What are we talking about affordable? And I think once we basically have that discussion with them and they realize that we are looking to try and make it as affordable as possible within the metrics of that country, within issues regarding the amount of money that, for example, a person basically is able to earn a year. And we then, from that figure, get the standard portion that they would typically spend the household income on housing. Then we try and fit our products within there so that it is also not a burden. In addition to that, the fact that we are also trying to bring house ownership into play is also another issue, where we try and look for instruments that will basically will not be as big a burden as the standard bank financing products that they have. Again, that is something that really does come to bear and is a very big consideration, because we are also bringing affordability and house ownership to play. And I think just finally, just what I mentioned before is that the demand is very, very big. And not just here, I think across the continent, the demand outstrips the supply. And even what is being supplied is typically of very low quality. So the fact that we are bringing on board quality housing within a specific price point for a specific target market does help us quite a bit to raise funds. We are still raising more funds, so we are still working on that. Thank you.
Corey, if there was one or two pieces of advice that you'd give to local municipalities to unlock finance or accelerate the supply of various forms of housing in their city. I noticed that IHS has been involved in funding 10, 20, 30,000 units. So with that comes an immense experience. What should municipalities and cities be doing? And we're not just talking about your big metros, but your smaller towns. What advice would you give them to start to unlock interest in their housing sector, and also so that they're not sort of singularly responsible for increasing supply of good quality, affordable housing?
It's a good question. I think fundamentally, if you look at it historically, a lot of social housing, I think across the world, has been done and provided by governments, but in it of itself is not sustainable. To be fair, the government cannot be the one that is actually building all those 500 or 200,000 units. But I think one of the big things they can do is to facilitate the building, to help out in the building. And some of the ways they can do is, number one, providing infrastructure at their cost. Another thing is unlocking land. As I said, the land issue in our region is a big issue. And the governments are able to go and buy bigger chunks of land and service them over a period of time. And then basically plan the development, the land use, and dedicate specific areas just for affordable housing. I mean, from a commercial perspective, they would need also to sell some of the land on a commercial basis to subsidize what they're doing. But I think those are key issues actually that would actually help a lot. And as Casey had said, and she had mentioned, there is the whole issue of the open access initiative. And fundamentally what it is that we are trying to empower other people within this specific space to get the tools and the know-how of how to build. Because we can't build everything ourselves, but we can share our experiences, our strengths, our challenges, and even point fingers to where people can get affordable financing. Because the pie, as I say, is big enough for everybody. And most likely we will leave a big chunk of it untaken. Thanks,
you. I also noted that there's agreement with your comment. There was, I think it's Sean Resnick also just mentioned large tracts of land across well-located areas of cities, which really just need to be unlocked for development and really just need to get going, especially given the cost of land in various parts. But in South Africa, at least, there's, as I mentioned earlier, from parking lots owned by cities to large pieces of land owned by regional and national governments, with a lot of nothing that has been done. We have time for a question by audio or video. Shaningwa Amadila, if you're ready, we have 30 seconds for your question.
Hi, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. I'm Shaningwa. I'm just a private citizen from Namibia. Listening in, I'm always involved in social matters. I sort of wanted to ask whether this question is related to or can be answered by Samantha or is it Kesha, with regards to how affordable housing can sort of be given, but how do you maintain, how do you give someone affordable housing that is not employed? Because at the end of the day, you need to keep this infrastructure going and maintain it. Yet, you know, employment is always a big issue. So I wanted to understand sort of, you know, what Samantha or Kesha have been dealing in terms of giving affordable housing that is sort of linked to people that are not employed, yet they need to maintain. How do they handle that aspect?
Thanks, Shaningwa.
Yes.
Or Kesha or Samantha, do you want to tackle that question around those with low income or no income and access to housing or affordable housing?
I'll give it a stab. The delivery of free housing is unique to South Africa. I know that Namibia has something a little bit similar, but perhaps not at the same scale as the South African National Housing Subsidy Program. It's a really important consideration in terms of the design of the unit, because one would want that unit is something that can sustain, is durable over a long period of time. And then I suspect the expectation and the hope is that the person's financial situation is not static. They may be unemployed, but they're having to sustain themselves in one way or another. They may be accessing a social grant, or they may be doing informal work, and that comes and goes. And we've done some interesting work on housing investment chronicles. We did a project in Mozambique and another one in Uganda, where we asked people to talk about how they paid for their house. Where they got the money from, and from so many different sources, because people were committed to investing in a place that they could have as their own, or that they, and that they could sustain themselves to. So I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying that it's something that can be taken for granted, but it is quite remarkable the level of household investment that does go into housing, which is all the more reason why the governance around that is so critical. So management of urban services and waste collection and all of that extra stuff. I think what the Neighborhood Partnership Development Program is doing is really starting to show that kind of opportunity as well. You need to create not just sustainable housing, but sustainable environments where literally people can sustain themselves in that context. But the inclination to do so seems to be pretty strong.
Thanks so much for your question. Thanks so much, Kesha, for replying. And yes, a good opening point that, the delivery of free or highly subsidized housing is very unique to some contexts and very unique to South Africa and its more recent history. And with that, a number of challenges. Kesha, we have a few minutes left, but I just had a question around the word finance. And before I ask the question, Everyone else, you're welcome to, of course, turn on your videos if you'd like to for the last part of the session. But when we speak of finance, I'm imagining, and Koi, maybe something you could answer as well, big money, big funds, big banks. But there are a lot of questions in the chat about informal, semi-formal, micro developers, and that if you read some of the more recent papers by academics and researchers, the majority of growth should be absorbed in backyards, in additions to existing homes. Do we need to change our notion of what finance is and direct finance to households, or find ways to direct finance to micro developers or township developers? Because I think we know that it's not just going to be big dense apartment blocks in inner cities that's going to have a big impact. And most affordable housing, as you mentioned, is probably being delivered by individuals in various forms. So is the word finance the problem, and how do we unpack that into something that's a bit more nuanced?
I mean, I'll take a stab to start with, Kyo, if that's okay. I mean, I'm not so sure the word finance is a problem, but maybe it's our anxiety about it. Finance, it's just money, and it's big or small, and I would argue that it's any kind of money. So it would be your savings, it would be what goes into a SACCO, savings and credit cooperative. It could be credit, and that credit could come from your mother, or it could come from a lender, or it could come from a bank. They're across the whole value chain of housing, land, infrastructure, construction, so on. There are finance moments. Housing needs to be paid for, and it's seriously expensive, and often in its whole form, way more expensive than what somebody can afford. So that's why credit becomes so important in that context, in different finance arrangements that mix things. It could be your pension withdrawal benefit is often used, and in some countries like South Africa, you can have pension-backed loans as well, and that's useful when there isn't a title situation. So it's all the money, like the financial resources that go into building and maintaining housing. There is a real challenge back to those who facilitate and who offer that money, and who facilitate the flow of that money and offer it, is that it's way more efficient to do it when it's big, right? That's definitely easier. And so what we do need, I think, on this continent more than elsewhere, perhaps, is mechanisms to disaggregate capital, so that it suits the delivery and the consumption requirements of the population, whether that's the individual household, or it's a micro builder or a developer or whatever. So ways in which you can take that big capital and disaggregate, which is something what International Housing Solutions does, because they create a fund, and people are like happy to go and invest there because they trust Kyo, and they trust that Kyo is going to know all of the developers that they're investing in. Forgive me for paraphrasing, Kyo, you can clarify afterwards. But that's, and to be able to do that even at a smaller scale. And I know that SDI has been interested in thinking about, well, how does that work when you start to add up everything that people have been saving? There's value there. How do you leverage that value with other capital? And there, it's the question about how do you manage the risks, right? And make sure that everybody is expected to do what they're required and have the capacity to do. That's another long conversation. But there's been some really interesting work done around this concept of massive small. And I think that's worth thinking about. DAG's been working around issues with micro builders as well, but the massive capacity of lots of small scale operators. And with technology as we have it now, we actually have the possibility of holding it, like wrapping our arms around it and making it attractive also to the big investors. That intermediation function is what we need.
And I think that is also, Koi, before coming to you for a closing perspective, it's also in just transport, big capital for big infrastructure. But in reality, it's traders moving goods between storage, it's cycling, it's walking, it's public realm activations that are happening anyway, which make lives easier. And so how do you pull that and facilitate that and and create, I suppose, urban context with 10,000 projects being activated. And I suppose that's also a philosophy about how the city should run. Who has the control and where does financing go? Koi, do you have any additional comments as to correct Kezia's paraphrasing?
No, I agree with Kezia. I think on the front end side of the affordable housing, and I'll paraphrase that in terms of the financing, getting finance, the project finance, the construction finance. Most of that money is institutional, it's conventional, it's standard, block standard from what we're used to. There is not much microfinance component in that. But when you look downstream, especially the side of off-taking, where people want to buy, where people want to rent, you find that that in itself is also very local. We do have a saying where we say that real estate is a local business. What works in one city doesn't necessarily work in another. And I think that is very true in this, where you find that different places have got their own unique ways of actually financing the offtake of affordable houses. Just as Casey had mentioned about the SACCOs, the savings and credit and cooperative societies, that's very big, especially within our region here, but it isn't developed elsewhere. And that is used as a very big tool, especially within this space, that basically helps people, basically get housing and to buy, unlike the typical mortgages. Ironically, Kenya has got very few mortgages, and I mean significantly few, less than 45,000. And I think 80% of that are bank employees. So we've had to think outside the box of different ways of how we can help facilitate the purchase of these units and one of the ways we have done is just by using these local instruments, number one, SACCOs, and there are microfinance institutions that actually help in this space.
Thank you so much, Kezia, Koi, Samantha, and Salim Fakir for the message and the thoughts. I know that 2 hours is hardly sufficient time periods to cover this issue, but I think even from the presentations from today and our time together, we've got a more sophisticated view. We've got better knowledge and data, as you mentioned, and that if we are to act urgently, then we need to shine the light in the right areas and equip ourselves with better data. And I hope we have chances to engage again in future. For all of those who asked questions and participated, thank you very much. The recording will be up online at the Rise Africa website in a week or two. So if you missed this or needed to share with your university or students, colleagues or networks, this will be up. You would also have noted that throughout the session, we've been sharing links to the IHS, to CAF, to some of the work mentioned, links to the CSP program, to the NDP program as well. So please click on all of those links to engage further with these various organizations.